exactly what it is that we'd like you to do.
Hi, Real Rundowns here. Today I'm going to explain a horror thriller film called Nefarious. Watch out and take care. An overseer of brain science named Dr. Stewart apprehensively moves around his office. Subsequent to composing his will, he ends it all by leaping off the structure's rooftop. In a state prison, remarkable new friendly clinician Dr. James Martin shows up to question an infamous chronic executioner and death row prisoner named Edward. Prior to meeting Edward, Martin uncovers to the superintendent, Greenery, that he was gotten to fill in for Stewart, who was Edward's standard guest for this system. Edward is booked to pass on through electric shock at his demand that very day, and Greenery clarifies for Martin that Edward's destiny relies on Martin's conclusion. In the event that Martin derives that Edward is rational, he will be executed, yet assuming he is pronounced crazy by means of mentally diverse confusion, as Stewart had accepted, Edward will be saved. Martin meets Edward, who shows up incredibly self-assured and sure of things, knowing such a lot of data about Martin and confusing him of words for a presentation. At the point when Martin sits down to examine Edward, the detainee won't be a human, and on second thought a devil possessing Edward's body named Nefariamous, a name Satan gave him, Odious for short. Martin doesn't accept Odious is who he says he is, and thinks rather that it is a demonstration by Edward to appear to be crazy. But he is astonished when Terrible demands that he needs to be executed, or rather, that he believes Edward should be executed. Odious likewise makes sense of that before the day is finished. Martin will carry out 3 killings. Martin, a skeptic, dismisses this thought which pesters Loathsome, who considers him a self-important sack of meat, in accepting that he is protected simply because he figures such things don't exist. Martin cooperates, asking Accursed how he came to possess Edward. Terrible makes sense of that he started enticing Edward since early on to commit little sins prior to speaking with him through an Ouija board Edward got for Christmas. Detestable had Edward's body solely after Edward agreed to the belonging on numerous occasions. Martin gets a clergyman to defy the evil presence in Edward, which startles Terrible until he understands that the minister doesn't put stock in devils and subsequently significantly affects him. Martin then, at that point, requests to converse with Edward, causing Loathsome to subside and deliver a tentative, honest Edward, who is frightfully troubled and shaken by his ownership. Edward demands that he is moved by that the devil had killed different individuals involving his guiltless body as a vessel. At the point when Martin starts examining further, Accursed assumes command and demands that Martin killed his mom. Stunned that Detestable knows this, Martin demands that his mom was passing on from a terminal disease and was euthanized after a hard choice for his sake. At the point when Evil gathers that Martin euthanize her to obtain her gigantic abundance, Martin ends up being furious and takes steps to leave the gathering, yet alters his perspective. Detestable makes sense of he is intellectually preparing Martin for an undertaking he believes Martin should do, and that he intellectually tormented Stewart, driving him to end his own life in order to choose Martin for this work. At the point when Martin keeps on being dubious of Terrible, the devil makes sense of that he realizes Martin's better half is pregnant, and that due to Martin's intentions to part ways with her to stay away from parenthood, she is ending her pregnancy. Terrible makes sense of that Martin can save his child with a basic call inside the restricted measure of time, yet Martin declines, thinking Loathsome is feigning while likewise demanding that something like this is his sweetheart's decision to make. Be that as it may, defeat with interest, Martin asks a merciful jail monitor for admittance to a telephone, which he uses to call the Ladies' Well-Being Center. After calling, he understands his better half has recently wrapped up with the fetus removal. Loathsome chuckles with happiness, clearing up for Martin that all damnation is cheering. A jail systematic approaches Edward what he needs for a last feast before execution, to which Edward gives explicit bearings for a straightforward burger, fries, and milkshake, just for Odious to take command and advise the officiant to withdraw the request. Martin, presently inspired by what Accursed needs to tell him. Odious makes sense of the conflict in paradise according to his perspective, saying that the evil presences revolted to keep away from an unfathomable length of time of bondage, and that they have been thriving on the planet. He likewise makes sense of that he picked the demise by hot seat, since it was the most unbearable and difficult passing accessible, and would be a memento before Edward's spirit goes to damnation forever of greater torture. Martin demands that the world is recovering the ethical strategic position by permitting a wide range of privileges and opportunities, which Odious chuckles at prior to uncovering to him reality with regards to such opportunities, remembering a downfall for instruction and a flood of servitude and dealing the evil presences assist the tip-top with overseeing in secret. Martin starts feeling sorry for Edward Terrible, and nearly thinks of him off as crazy, to which Loathsome advises him to redact. Martin is truly befuddled with regards to which evil is until Edward gets through, asking Martin to help him. In any case, before he can advise Martin how to help him, Accursed takes control once more and rebuffs Edward by breaking one of his fingers prior to resetting it at Martin's demand. Detestable then makes sense of the undertaking he maintains that Martin should accomplish for him is to compose a book called The Dim Gospel, which is his evil identical to the Book of Scriptures, and will start a different universe religion, this one in subjugation to devils. Terrible then lets Martin in on a strictly confidential mystery that a greater number of individuals are as of now going to damnation than to paradise. Martin is summoned by Superintendent Greenery, who uncovers to him that after looking through Edward's jail cell, they tracked down an enormous documentation of Martin's life, as Terrible had finished with all his different casualties, as well as the dull gospel which Edward composed, attributing it to Martin's name. Greenery urges Martin to denounce Edward, demanding that assuming he is saved, he will most likely pursue Martin. Martin, accepting Edward is faking split characters, goes up against Odious about this. Odious breaks his hand to slip liberated from one of the sleeves and holds on to Martin, taking steps to break his neck, except if Martin beseeches him forever. Defeat with dread, Martin asks Evil to save him, to which Accursed goes along prior to being thumped by the jail watches. Without giving it much thought, Martin directs that Edward is rational, yet not prior to being cautioned by a victorious Odious that he is sentencing Edward to death. Edward's head is shaved and he is directed to the hot seat. As Martin precariously sits with the groups of Terrible's casualties to observe the execution, he is praised by the criminal investigator who endured 6 years seeking after Edward prior to catching him. Notwithstanding, Martin is uncertain of whether he pursued the ideal choice. Recollecting the 3 killings Accursed let him know he would commit, which he induces was his mom, his child, and presently Edward. Before the execution, Edward begs Martin to come clean about the wicked belonging. However, Martin is uncertain what to accept, and acknowledges he is excessively far ahead to do anything now. Before the switch is pulled, Odious assumes command over Edward's body for a last time frame, inquiring as to whether Martin acknowledges his deal, to which Martin quietly denies. Frustrated Evil statements, "Mene tekel uparsin." You have been estimated in the scale and seen as needing, prior to leaving Edward's body, making Edward experience a very agonizing and horrendous passing in the seat. The devil then tells Martin, "You ought to have acknowledged my proposition, prior to having him." Martin, under Odious's impact, snatches the analyst's firearm and holds the observers at gunpoint. Martin then, at that point, understands that the 3 killings he would commit that day were, rather than his child, Edward, and presently himself. Loathsome powers Martin to end it all, however, Martin accidentally balances this by imploring God for help, making the weapon jam. Accursed relinquishes Martin as he blacks out into the arms of the security. After 1 year, a noticeably changed Martin is shown advancing Odious's book, not as a dull gospel, yet as a revised wake-up call for individuals to peruse and understand the devilish impact in the public eye. Regardless of demanding he is as yet a skeptic, he uncovers he has gone through many changes. Returning, Martin sees a vagrant scavenging through a dumpster. He gives her some cash and she takes it prior to saying, "Hi, James," in Odious's voice, suggesting that she is Loathsome's new host. The screen slices to dark with Loathsome's frightful giggling caught wind of. What did you think of Nefarious? Let me know in the comments below. If it's your first time, please subscribe to watch more videos, smash that bell for alerts for real rundowns. Thanks for watching.